What would Charlton Heston say? Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, no, this episode is not about gun control. Referencing Charlton Heston actually has to do with one of his classic movie roles in Planet of the Apes. And we get news today from the Daily Star out of the UK that an experiment taking place in China has successfully formed a hybrid human-monkey embryo. I'm going to call this a chimera. A human-monkey mashup, let's call it, that includes some human stem cells in a monkey embryo. Bill, there are so many issues around this. I'd like to take them one by one, but let me give you a quick overview of them. The research is being done by an American organization called the Salk Institute, after Jonas Salk, and I believe a Spanish university called Murcia Catholic University. The research is occurring in China to avoid, quote, legal issues that might ensue if they did it in, say, Spain or the United States. The resulting embryo is killed by these people from this Catholic university after 14 days or so. And there are a bunch of other questions, Bill, but I guess the overarching question, first of all, is what do you think of the idea of performing research in a communist country to avoid the legal or ethical issues that might arise in Western civilization?
Well, it speaks for itself. I thought when you started the story that it was a Chinese research team doing that, but it's even more damning. It's an indication that it's just a frank, open admission that there are some. When they said legal issues, what they're really talking about are moral and ethical issues, which may be enforced by law in civilized countries. But I think clearly that's the reason why this research is taking place in China. And one of the many things I've noticed about China is that China doesn't seem to care much about anything other than China. So that alone is condemnation enough, and I'm sure we'll be getting into specifics.
Many euros are being spent, by the way, in the course of this research, and I'm sure that benefits the Chinese economy to a small extent. Bill, there are dangers involved, obviously, in this kind of research. And let me just tell you, the overarching goal of them, as they would say, the ultimate goal would be to create a human organ that could be transplanted. So they're trying to create these hybrid creatures as an organ farm. And so let's take that particular issue on its own merits, the idea of using other creatures in order to manufacture human organs to sustain our life. Bill, I know you're an animal lover. What do you think about treating animals this way?
I'm a bacon lover too. So the idea of animals being killed in terms of things like pigs and horses or whatever the case may be. I mean, this is something that just happens by the millions every day, or by the hundreds of thousands certainly, and I don't carry around an awful lot of ethical burden about that. So it's not the animal that's the issue; it's the human part that's the issue. And when you first told me this story, I was reminded about what was rumored to be a human-chimpanzee hybrid. And this would have been, I want to say, maybe mid to late 70s, something like this. And they have lots and lots of video footage of this creature. And it was really horrifying looking. Turns out it was a chimp with some kind of issue with hair loss and so on. But it was a scary looking thing. And it evokes a kind of a primal horror in people. And I don't know how to explain it. Says I never really thought about this before. But I suspect that what drives that kind of sense of horror, and especially when you read books like The Island of Dr. Moreau, or even saw the movie, which was pretty awful, but this idea of grafting humans and animals together and turning into human-animal hybrids and so on just chills you to the bone. And the only reason I can think of for this is that I suspect that it taps into a sort of inborn and when I say inborn, I mean inborn across basically all species, not just humans and not just primates. A kind of an inborn natural revulsion towards birth defects. I think that's built into the genome of most animals. I'm not suggesting this for humans. This is why we're humans. This is why I'm proud to be a human. But generally speaking, most animals, when an infant is born with a noticeable birth defect, there's something overpowering that forces the parents or whoever nearby to kill that creature, because evolution over time has said that, look, you cannot allow this gene to reproduce itself, and those genes, those groups of people that did allow it to reproduce themselves aren't here anymore. So I suspect that's probably the primal sense of where this horror comes from, is this idea of this kind of birth freaky event that just seems just untenable and it's just awful on a gut level, because we don't have any intellectual evidence to compare it by. So there's something really primal about that, and that's the evolutionary argument. The moral and religious argument is that the essential quality of humanity is a sense of awareness and self, and certainly this is what drives a belief in a soul. And I think believing in a human soul is a profoundly good idea. And so when you start talking about parceling out genes and starting to take the human creature and starting to split it up into component pieces and farm it out to other creatures whose sole purpose in life are to be organ donors, it evokes a kind of a religious and philosophical horror to match what I believe is a sort of a built-in genetic response.
So scientists have tried to do this with other creatures, including birds and rats and mice, and the whole idea is to develop transplantable hearts or eyes or pancreases. However, there's a doctor at Barcelona Regenerative Medicine Center who admitted that there's some ethical barriers in this kind of research, and asks this question: what happens if the stem cells, meaning the human stem cells, escape out of the organs at which they're targeted to and form human neurons in the brain of the animal? Would it have consciousness? What happens if these stem cells turn into sperm cells? That initial question, Bill, seems even more to trigger that kind of horror that you're talking about. What do you do when your experiment goes awry and you've now created a creature that has some sort of consciousness that can experience revulsion, for example?
Well, this is the source of all of our fears. I think this is the source of anybody with any kind of an ethical core. This is what we fear. And we find it as a horror because of a short story I'm going to come to in just a second. You probably guess what it is. We certainly have the ability, if we don't have it now, we will have it very soon, certainly have the ability to create a, let's just say for the sake of the argument, a human gorilla hybrid with an IQ of maybe 60 and an enormous amount of physical strength. And such a creature could be extremely useful in terms of loading bags onto airplanes or any other kind of heavy lifting work, as long as it was fairly simple and routine and processable. Then you could certainly teach it to do a number of actions which they would be far better suited for than human beings, not only in terms of their physical strength, but it's their actual lack of IQ that would make them perfectly suited for this kind of repetitive work. And if this doesn't make your skin crawl and make you really, really want to burn down the lab, then I think there's something wrong with you. Because what you're talking about there is you are talking about creating a race of slaves. You're talking about creating and manufacturing servants for us whose entire lives are predicated around our personal comfort and survival. And there's something deeply wrong about that. Right now, you can argue, and in fact, I think this is the argument. Yes, people eat pork chops and they eat bacon and they eat a lot of it. That means a lot of pigs are killed. True, all of that's true. But you can even say further that pigs are bred for this purpose. That's fine, but the pig did not appear on the earth to be a servant to mankind. Neither did the dog, for that matter, or any of these other creatures. There's something fundamentally disgusting about taking a life form and making its entire purpose serving us. And you can, even if you were to go to a case of like a horse, for example, or a mule, they were killed by the millions in World War I, millions and millions of them killed. Nevertheless, that creature has a life of its own in a meadow or in somewhere. And we're getting perilously close to this kind of thing when you start talking about these chicken farms where they never see the light of day and all these other things that I have a big ethical problem with. So there's this whole kind of a godlike sort of arrogance and just sheer nasty narcissism about it that really, really reeks. I think at this point I have to bring up a very quick short story, which if you haven't read, you need to. Although here's the spoiler: this entire ethical question was summed up in a magnificent story, very short story called "Those That Walk Away from Omelas" by Ursula K. Le Guin. And spoiler alert, here it comes. In this very short story, she posits that there's this society, and everything in the society is magnificent. There's no crime, there's no rape, there's no murder, there's no defects, there's no disease. It's nothing but science and music and poetry and peace, and everybody lives fulfilled lives, and no children go hungry, and no children die early, and it is an absolute paradise on earth in any conceivable form. It is an enormously, unbelievably pleasant utopia to live in. And in the course of this very short story, we discover that the reason that Omelas has this unbelievably perfect existence is because in the basement of one of these buildings, down in a dungeon, is a small child that is chained there, naked, covered in sores, covered in vermin, and covered in her own filth. And she is fed a bowl of slop once a day. And it is her suffering that basically provides the cleansing agent for the entire society. In other words, this entire society is able to live this perfect, painless, magnificent life because of the suffering of this one innocent person. And in this story, Ursula K. Le Guin says that sometimes people will go down to visit and look at this child who's suffering. And when it's pointed out to you that, look, if we don't do things this way, if we abandon this arrangement, there's still going to be naked, hungry kids living in their own filth and covered in vermin. But there's going to be a lot more of them. And there's going to be other sicknesses, and there's going to be wars, and there's going to be diseases and hunger and so on. So surely it's better to have one person endure this so that thousands and thousands of people don't have to endure this or worse. That's the argument for Omelas. And it's just so elegantly written. She says, and this is why the city is so happy and why it's such a wonderful place to live. He says, but some people, when they see this child, they walk away from Omelas. They walk away from this paradise. And they walk away. The reason they walk away is the reason that this kind of research is so disturbing.
There's one final. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I'm probably missing an important beat.
I was going to say that there's one final aspect of this story. When that objection is raised that it's possible that some of these stem cells will turn into neurons or brain cells, one of the scientists participating in the experiment says that couldn't really happen because if the stem cells begin to form a human brain, they will self-destruct. And he added that they've put a red line in there of 14 days of gestation, and in no case is the gestation brought to full term. Bill, does that comfort you that it will self-destruct and that they're cutting it off at 14 days?
No, and I'm obviously ran long on the story, but the story needs an important conclusion.
Go for it.
People will leave Omelas. A certain number of people, not anybody, and maybe not the majority, a percentage of people will walk away from that paradise and go out into a world of death and disease and defects and destruction, because the entire purpose of this story is to show that the entire benefits of this magnificent society are built upon the sufferings of an innocent person. That one innocent person is suffering so that everybody else can live a magnificent life. And there is an ethical decision to be made there. And people with a conscience and a soul cannot be happy knowing that their happiness is predicated upon the suffering of others. This is what people often accuse capitalists of. They think, oh, well, we were just happy because other people are suffering. No. If I thought that whatever wealth I can amass was coming from somebody else's mouth, I'd have a real problem with that, but that's not how it is. So the ethical issue is, what where do you draw the line in terms of what is a benefit to humanity? And while there are tremendous benefits to be derived from this, I'm sure, in terms of transplants and so on, there is a philosophical horror that doesn't need explaining. You either feel it or you don't. And this is the thing that worries me about science at the bleeding edge of our technological advances. The scientists who are pulling off these miracles, and many of them are miracles, and there's enormous, nothing but good from so many of these drugs and medications and vaccines and all the rest. But when you get to the bleeding edge of this kind of technology, the quest to solve the problem, the scientific problem that needs to be solved, becomes so overwhelming and so consuming, and this is why they're scientists, and this is why I admire them. But when it gets to that point, you begin to start to lose track of all sorts of ethical things. We see this endlessly in the realm of artificial intelligence. And I'll just close by saying this just because it's an interesting point for people to know. I also think that this research, if it's necessary now, is not going to be necessary for long. I think it should be terminated. I have seen the video myself. It's a very difficult thing to believe, but if you take a heart, a human heart, for example, you're used to seeing all of the cells and the blood vessels and all the rest of it. But if they've been able to take a chemical solution that destroys the cells, just kills the cells. And what you're left with when you flush this heart out is it looks like it's a ghostly thing made out of smoke. But what it is the actual protein structure of the heart. It's like the heart has an actual skeleton to it. It's a protein skeleton that forms the casing of the heart and all of the different chambers. And when you bleach all the cells out of that, you now have a structure that has no cells that need to be overcome with rejection. The reason we reject hearts is because our bodies, a transplant is because our body recognizes it as foreign matter. So I've seen it. And so what they've done is they've taken this human heart, bleached all the cells out of it, and then put stem cells into this protein structure. And then the thing starts beating. Because stem cells are, in fact, miraculous. And the reason that technology is different than the one that we're talking about, and the reason I bring this example up, is because there's a perfectly good case of achieving the noble goals of trying to extend people's lives and deal with failing organs and so on that doesn't violate any of these fundamental ethical boundaries that are not stuff that's written down. You either feel them or you don't. And I am deeply concerned when scientists come to the conclusion that their research has to be conducted in a place where ethics and philosophy and morality are routinely disregarded. If that's where you have to do your research, I recommend that you stop and take a long drive and go out to some national parks and see some actual people and think very carefully about why it is you are being forced to go to a place where morality and ethics come second to profits and prestige.
There's an old saying that methods are many and principles are few. Methods always change. Principles never do. 5 days a week, Bill Whittle now brings you the foundational principles as they come in conflict with the breaking news of the day. And we do that thanks to the generosity of the members at BillWhittle.com. If you'd like to join their ranks, go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.